Everyone, thanks so much for joining us. We are here with Coach Lee Dobbins with another Coach Connect Live. We're getting to ask some questions about recruiting. So, Coach, thanks so much for being a part of this and helping everyone, including myself, figure out the recruiting process in softball. I know that you've been in collegiate coaching in some way, assistant head coach for over 20 years. Just so everyone kind of hears your background, could you tell us a little bit of your journey in softball, maybe even from travel ball all the way through your college experience in coaching and stuff?
Yeah. Obviously club ball is where I started many, many years ago. Wasn't a collegiate athlete. I knew my boundaries there in high school and knew I wasn't going to move on, but still wanted to give back to the game. Fast pitch, both men's and women. Were big where I came from and where I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And, it just led me to fast pitch softball. My whole family played it throughout their lives. Obviously, I started working with some of the club programs around that area before the innovation of large club programs and showcases and all that good stuff back in the good old days, as they call it. But, that led me to obviously a connection with my mentor and someone that's been a very close friend and advisor to be, Jim Badia. When he was the head coach, the first head coach at the University of Tennessee, and led me up there to complete my education and kind of start my whole trek with collegiate coaching, which obviously I've done for the last 20 years, and then I've gone to a few spots, and like I said, at all levels, and been able to obviously coach at the Division I level and the JUCO level and all levels in between. So it's been like I said, a fruitful journey, but one that now we're trying to give back to the game and obviously develop the younger players and try to get them exposed to collegiate coaches through an educational aspect and process that we follow.
Wow, that's great. Now, just curious, because as we jump into questions, this is one that comes up. Some people go, "Hey, it's D1 or nothing." Some people go, "Oh, it doesn't matter." What's your feeling on JUCO all the way up to D1 from a college perspective?
It's all linked together. Ultimately, I think players, if you have the opportunity to go on at any level, that is the key. The key is the educational aspect. Where can you get your best benefit educationally? If that's at a Division I institution and they allow you to go there and they recruit you to go there and financially things linked up, that's great. But if it's not, there's a lot of different levels out there. Obviously that people can fit in. As well as I do from a competition level, people can say Division I, is the end all, but I know a lot of good Division II programs, NAIs, D3s, JUCOs, all levels that can compete and a lot of times in the fall beat the Division I schools, when they're scrimmaging around and it's from that standpoint. But I think the fit should be the key with any player, anyone that's looking. I understand wanting to be on television and wanting to be on ESPN and wanting to be in Oklahoma City in June. It's a great experience out there, but obviously it's for the few and far between. From that standpoint, that small percentage of elite athletes. And like I said, you don't have to necessarily be the top elite athlete to contribute to a program and obviously get your education, quote, paid for, as coaches say. And like I said, I think there's fits at all levels, and people need to find those fits firstly before they even look at the softball, from an academic standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I think the fit is so important, not just from a sports perspective, but the major that you want and the school and the coaching and all of those things. Now that's great. And over the time of talking with coaches, I've heard some say they love the NIA and JUCO and stuff because there's a lot more freedom than you have at like the D2 or the D3 level with rules and stuff. So that's great insight.
Yeah, we call it the wild, wild west with NAI and JUCO, because obviously they can get out there and where NCAA's really restricted on what they can do as far as talking with players, when they can talk to players, what they can do, NAI, JUCO coaches. And that's what I'd coached the last few years of my collegiate coaching career was NAI. You literally can walk up to them at any point during tournament, whatever age. You can sit down next to them in the dugout. I even make jokes about, hey, they can, get you a car, they can do all that kind of good stuff, which they actually can't. That's just a joke. But
right.
Obviously a lot of freedom, as you said, with NAI and JUCO to be able to go through the recruiting process. And I think a lot of times at those levels, athletes, prospective student athletes, and parents are even considered. I think I would consider them being more well informed because of the connection they make with those coaches, because it's more frequent, from that standpoint.
No, that's good. So let me ask you one question. One of probably the biggest questions I get asked all the time is, how do I know if a college is actually interested in me? So you can go to camps, you could send emails, you could participate in things. And sometimes kids feel like, man, I don't hear anything back. I'm not sure if they're interested. Other than flat out asking, as a previous coach and all these levels, how did you express interest in a player?
I think, as you mentioned before, with the varying degrees of communication per level, I think going back to, and again, not harping all, giving NAI and JUCO complete props on everything, those top coaches are going to be on you a lot. You're going to get a lot of communication from them. It's going to be a lot of personal communication. You'll probably get phone calls, emails, the text messages. It becomes a little more difficult, obviously, at the NCAA level with the rules, the restrictions, things like that. I think that, and again, I always tell players, flat out ask them when you can ask them. You're going to get the feeling. I would follow your gut. And again, that doesn't mean you close a door if your gut's telling you something where it's like, well, they're not really communicating with me. I went to camp. They were kind of lukewarm maybe at camp, from that standpoint. I think you're going to know. If you get the positive response at things when you can communicate with them, when you can't act with them, I think your gut's going to tell you, well, yeah, they're interested to a varying degree. Now, I say this because of the innovations of things like, I call it the free agent portal, but the transfer portal. Things change for institutions. They could be very lukewarm on you one day, and then a week later, there's a player that has left their program, whether it's by their hand or for greener pastures or whatever, and all of a sudden you're back on their radar again. I say don't burn a bridge, because you might have to walk back over that bridge. So I think players particularly, use your gut. Like I said, if you're feeling, they might not be that interested. Well, they might not be that interested, but that doesn't mean you shut that door. You just go to another door at that point. And you're going to feel, quote, as people say, the love from the people that are interested in you at that point. Now, I wouldn't waste time on, like I said, and I want to be clear of this, having ran camps and clinics on the collegiate level, being an owner of a non-institutional camp entity at this point. If you're invited to camp, that's a general thing sometimes. Now, top recruits get invitations, and as far as, they're definitely interested. We want to get you on campus, but obviously camps are also a way of income for collegiate coaches. So they want to try to fill their camps up. Now, because you get a camp invitation doesn't necessarily mean they're interested. So I wouldn't take that as a pro on that, but I wouldn't take it as a negative either. The great point about that is that they don't know much about you. You go to their camp, that's an opportunity for you to impress them at that point. So, like I said, varying degrees of communication. A camp invitation might mean they're interested, might mean, hey, they just want you at camp. But obviously, I would follow your gut as far as, who's interested, showing me the love, who's not interested, showing me not showing me the love, and then go from there. But don't be afraid to go back to the institution that maybe didn't show a lot up front, because they might end up needing, a player of, in that position or in that class down the road.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, like you said at the beginning too, I think it's important. I shared with my daughter, and when you come to a place and you want to know, ask them, where am I at in your recruiting process? And best to do it in person. If you can't, send the email. But I don't think there's anything wrong with flat out asking, like you said. I think it helps too, and it doesn't mean that you have to completely shut that door as well, because like you said, things change all the time.
Right, absolutely. And any coach worth their weight, honestly, is going to be completely truthful, at that point. And if you feel like they're not being truthful, again, that's kind of when the gut comes in. You're going to kind of feel that or get that vibe. And that might be a great indication maybe you don't fit in that program, or maybe that program doesn't fit you at that point.
Yeah. So just because we touched on it briefly, so how do you feel like the transfer portal has affected softball recruiting from a high school to college?
I mean, the initial thought for me, it's been very negative, from that standpoint. Now, the initial thought a few years ago.
Yeah.
Now, what we have to deal with is what we have to deal with. This is the point that we're at. I think it's part of the game now. People go back. I use this funny analogy. I was like, back in the day where people about, well, why do you wear a face mask on your helmet? Well, now it's become part of our game. Why do you wear a fielding mask? Oh, why are you wearing a fielding mask? Well, now it's becoming part of our game. I feel the transfer portal is the same thing. 3-4 years ago, people were like, oh, this is the worst thing to happen to college softball. And I'm not saying it's a complete positive. Obviously, it spins out of control a lot of times, but now it's part of our game. So people are using it. Coaches are using it. I'll be even as bold to say that coaches are winning national championships using it. Obviously, I think Oklahoma has done, a superb job of using it. And I think the coaches that use it correctly and know how to use it are being successful. And some coaches might be being left behind. But, I think it's been negative for over the first few years and of the portal. And then obviously it wrapped with the COVID situation of basically people getting, eligibility back. And, I knew some JUCO players that played 2 years of JUCO ball, and then they had 4 years of eligibility after that. They literally played 5 or 6 years of college softball. And I think it's been a negative. I think as things have started leveling out, I think obviously, if you're getting recruited and all of a sudden a player gets popped up in the transfer portal and they grab them and then you go to the wayside, I think the transfer portal creates positions for younger players somewhat, because players that feel like maybe they've got left behind their junior year, their senior year, all of a sudden someone jumps back in the game on them because, I just lost 3 players of the transfer portal. And I hate to say it's the lower levels, but and again, this irritates people when I say this, but mid-level Division I has become the minor leagues for big Division I. Division II has become the minor leagues for mid-major Division I. D3 has become the minor leagues for D2, so on and so on. So you got all these different divisions grabbing players from maybe other divisions, maybe and again, I'm just using this as an example, a Division II All-American all of a sudden gets the opportunity to move up to a Division I school. They're grabbing them. So, well, that's negative, but obviously it creates the opportunity at the D2 school of maybe them grabbing another player that might have fell through the cracks. That's a junior or a senior or whatever. So again, it's creating mischief, but it's creating opportunity too. And like I said, it's the system we have to work with. So you can either work within the system as a coach, or you can get left behind. And I think we're figuring out who works the system well and who's getting left behind at this point.
No, that's good. So let me jump into some recruiting questions. And this one's kind of a 3-part. But what do you think is one of the more important things about softball recruiting that student athletes miss?
I think being diligent in their communication. And what I mean by that is, and I say this at all our events when we do our Q&As with the coaches and stuff, and this gets brought up a lot with the collegiate coaches at our events, being diligent in your with your communications, whether that's the initial email or follow-up emails, that's important. But past the first introductory email, which a lot of times I get is the form type email, as far as, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm class of whatever, I play this position, I'm from here, this is my interests, yada, yada, yada. I think keeping themselves in front of the college coaches, just their names, is one thing that prospective student athletes can do better on. I think a lot of times they're told, hey, send an email out. They send an email out. After that first email, a month goes by and they sit there, well, I never heard back from so-and-so. Well, how many times did you follow up? Well, just that first email. Well, you have to understand, again, going back to the rules, there might be a reason they can't respond. It might be an NCAA. You got to remember, coaches get hundreds of emails a day. And even if they have a large staff, or if it's a head coach and a GA, they can't get back to all of them. So a lot of times things will fall through the cracks. It might be a week before they get back. I don't think there's too much communication. And what I mean by that, you can't communicate too much. Keep sending them the emails. Make sure in that subject line. It's your name, your class, your position. Keep that in front of them, because as a collegiate coach, if I kept getting emails from the same player over and over and over, they're at least in my mind. Like I flash through it and I'm like, oh, so and so again. It sometimes it can become a running joke with the staff of, oh, here's Sally Jones emailing us again. Well, Sally Jones, you might say, okay, well, boom, okay, she's going to be at whatever tournament we're going to with this, or whatever showcase we're going to at this point. You show up and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, Sally Jones is a little baller at this point. So that type of communication and that type of aspect of staying in front of that college or that coach through emails, and even if you're tweeting at them or any kind of other social media, helps it, you get ingrained in their head sometimes. So again, I don't think too much communication is such a thing, with me. I just think how you do your communication is key too. Like if you're sending the same email over and over and over again, the same form email, I think the coach can look at it and say, man, how many is this going out to? Like, I get, recruits trying to be seen by as many people as possible, but are they really interested with me? I always tell recruits, have a connection with them. Try to be personable with them. Like if you send an email out and say, hey, Coach Dobbins, I saw where you guys swept your conference series against blah, 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 blah. Just want to let you know this is what's going on with my week. That first line alone, I know, well, at least they're looking at our website. They're tracking our team. If you get the same old, dear coach, I am interested in da 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 da. It's you hear it. It's almost like a rhyme. Da 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 on this deal. And one of the worst things I've seen, and again, I've deleted them. A lot of coaches will say, well, I immediately delete it, is make sure you're particular about your communication. Like, and I use this as a joke, and just random institutions is usually in the regions of where I go is where I use the joke. And I'll use, for example, Alabama. Like if you're interested in the University of Alabama and you send an email and say, dear Coach Dean, I'm interested in the University of Alabama. Well, that's great, but Coach Dean is the coach at Auburn. So that usually is an immediate delete because you're not being, particular about how you're communicating. Like I know it's time consuming to do emails. I know it's time consuming, but that's part of the process. That's part of the process to do it. The student athlete needs to be doing it. I understand mom and dad might be helping, but that's another aspect too, is when an email comes from a mom or a dad. Like you start seeing different language, you start seeing words that 13, 14, 15-year-olds don't use. Make sure that you're doing it. Like I'm more inclined to get to know a recruit. And again, I know grammar is important, but if I get a couple of emails that sound like it's from a younger person, or wording or phrasing, or if there's a couple of misspellings, well, I probably know it came from them. That's part of the process.
Yeah, I love your example too with the person who sends the email over and over again, Sally Jones. That the funny thing is you now know her name, and so the continual emailing. If for anything else, you know of somebody's name because they keep selling. You joke about it and stuff. So it just proves your point, the importance of communication like that.
Absolutely.
So that the second part of the question is, if you could teach parents today one thing about college recruiting, what would it be?
I would say, and this is probably more of a phrase, be supportive, don't be in the way. And what I mean by that is I've seen more mom and dads probably cost kids scholarships and positions, whether that's what they saw from them in the stands or maybe how they interacted with them on a visit. And it's hard to understand a player because of mom and dad. Like that shouldn't be the reason you don't recruit a kid. But then on the other side, where we're living in the world of, mom and dad want to call every administrator, they want to tweet, they want to do Facebook, something doesn't go their way, you're hearing from them. You got to understand that college coaches look at it now of, I'm signing Sally Jones, but I'm also having to have Mr. and Mrs. Jones in my program for 4 years. And if they're a problem on their club team, if they're a problem with how they interact with officials, if it's a problem with, any other aspect, then a college coach is going to say, well, is what's the pros and cons here? Like, is she worth it to have to deal with that? If not, a lot of times that can be an issue. Now, in saying that, I think a lot of those type of aspects, a lot of things you see in social media now of how parents act at this point, you're probably seeing a small percentage. Like, that's not 90% of the parents are acting like that. That's probably 1 or 2% of parents that act like that. But unfortunately, there's not social media posts going around about, oh, look, there's mom and dad over there being supportive, and it's the mom and dad trying to throw fists at umpires and acting a fool in the stands and things like that. So we understand that's a small percentage of people. But, going back to your question, I think if the more mom and dad support the process, the more that they interact on a good level, but an educated level. I understand they're part of it. That is key, because, and I say this at every camp and clinic at the end when we do our Q&As, and I joke around, well, this is when we don't get repeat business at our clinics. I point at the prospects that are usually sitting or standing or kneeling or whatever, and say the decision of where you go to college is your decision. And then I usually point up in the stands, it's not their decision. And I mean that from the standpoint of the parents are very much in the process. A lot of times mom and dad are going to foot some of the bill for it, but ultimately they need to support where they want to go, or things with the transfer portal aren't going to get better from the aspect of players going for a semester or a year and then transferring out because they don't like it. If dad's again, I'm using analogies here. If dad's a huge Georgia Bulldog fan, and I love everything that Coach Tony and them do over there, but if he's a huge Georgia Bulldog fan, but Sally Jones' major is at North Dakota Tech College, let her go to North Dakota Tech. Don't go to Georgia because you're a Georgia football fan. That might be her academic fit. She might end up at Georgia. She hates it. It's not an academic fit. And again, I'm just using analogies here.
No, that's great.
Let them pick for themselves. They're not kids anymore, but in saying that, they're not quite adults. College is that area you're going to of trying to shape yourself on the adult that you're going to be. That's really their first major decision. What I'm going to do for the next 4 years. Am I going to fit academically? Do I like the town? Do I like the team? Do I like the coach? Because all those things, as far as coaching and athletics can change. I mean, coach can move on, coach can get fired, coach can, things change with the program and stuff like that. So make sure it's a place you want to go as like an academic, and mom and dad, you got to get behind that. Like, there's not anything, you can't force them just because you want them to wear a certain uniform to go where they don't fit, they don't want to be, because ultimately it's going to be 4 years of misery, or unfortunately, it might be a semester of misery. You don't want that. You don't want to have to go through the process again. That's an uncertainty. That process is a horrible uncertainty, and I've seen people go through more now than ever before. And like I said, it's the reward, and it's not the end. But when you make that decision, saying the reward is the process is over. Now, the process of getting better, the process of academics, the process of what you do for the next 4 years isn't over, but that process is over. That stress of, oh my gosh, I'm on the right team. Am I at the right showcase? Am I going to the right camp? Basically, you ended up making your decision. Everything at that point, it was worth it at that point. So that's your reward. Don't go off and make a bad decision that Sally didn't want to go there, and mom and dad push it down their throat. And then all of a sudden in December of that same year, you're going through the process again, trying to find a spot.
No, that's good. That's great advice. So we talked about the student athlete, we talked about the parent. The third part of this is, because you've been a travel coach and then into college, it's two-part, but what can a prospective student athlete expect from their travel ball coach? And what are some really good practices that you would like to see in the travel ball area that coaches could do to help with recruiting?
Education. And what I mean by that, and it's been many, many moons since I was on, quote, the travel ball level. Like back then, we didn't even call it travel ball. It was just summer softball, and I think it's changed dramatically. My deal would be, and I say this, and I get looks, and I get people that get mad sometimes about this when I use this analogy, but I believe there's travel ball coaches, and then I believe there's coaches in travel ball. I think there's two different. Again, I'm just using words on this to try to make a difference. Travel ball coaches a lot of times are guys that you don't see much education going on, or females, don't get me wrong on that, that aren't practicing a lot. They get together and play. They're playing their 5 showcases a year. They're doing, they're more concerned with what college logos are on their flip cards that they're handing to the coaches. They're more inclined to want to talk about, well, I did this, I got this one here, I got that. That's what I try to put. I try to put a travel ball. That's what I say, travel ball coach. Coaches in travel ball are people that, again, might not have a daughter, or they had a daughter. They've hung around because they love coaching. They love teaching. They educate, which means they're coaching offense. They're coaching defense. There's a lot of practicing going on, from that standpoint. They actually have practice. That's one of the worst things I see in club ball now is teams don't practice. Back when I was doing it, the schedule was, you practice Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe Thursday, you go to a tournament Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you take Monday off, you do it all over again. That was, quote, summer ball back then. Now some teams, because they're, and I get it, scattered all over the country, they don't ever practice. They just show up, they play. I think coaches, the coaches in travel ball, they make the commitment of, this is what our program, whether it's a team or whether it's a group of teams, this is what it's all about. Like, we want to develop them as they're younger. We want to bring them up through the ranks. We want to educate them, not just on the field, whether that's offense, defense, pitching, catching, but we want to educate them through the process. Like, when it comes time for recruiting, we want to make sure that we're being hands-on with them to be able to guide them in the right ways. Now, that takes education for them too. And whether that's someone that has gone through the process, let's say with their own daughter, or with a group of athletes before, all the better. If it's not someone that's gone through that process, that doesn't mean they can't advise or seek the information needed to help the player and the family out. Again, ultimately it's up to the player, the prospect, and the family. But I think a good, again, coach in travel ball, as I put it, will guide them through the process. It's less about them and more about the athlete from that standpoint. And again, a lot of times I get in the age of showcase and franchising and all this stuff that has taken club ball from just summer softball to, it seems almost like professional ranks at this point. We need to make sure the coaches and the people at that level are more concerned with educating, developing these players than ego and filling their own pockets. And again, I'm a for-profit softball business professional. I'm not going to knock anybody trying to make a living within the game, but I think the sight doesn't need to be lost at that level of, it's just summer softball. Like honest, that's what it developed from. We need to make sure that they're having a good time playing, because that's what it was all about. They're educating, they're getting better on the field, they're educating, getting better off the field. And then obviously with the recruiting that's bloomed and blown up the last 10 to 20 years, they're guiding their athletes to the right fit. It goes back to that aspect again. I know maybe North Dakota Tech doesn't look good on your flip card, on your recruiting card, but don't force them to the Division I school because that logo looks better for you. Who cares? I mean, if you got them placed, you got them placed. That's, to me, that's the responsibility of the coach in travel ball compared to the travel ball coach. And I hope that makes sense and doesn't offend too many people.
No, one of the things I love is, I was looking at a stat the other day. I posted it on my Instagram, but it was so the current stats is 5.7% of girls in softball play at the collegiate level from JUCO to D1. Mm-hmm. And when my daughter committed, I said, you just became part of that 5.7%. Right. And it's less if you're in D1, but the whole thing is, if you get to play collegiate level softball, man, that's a home run. That's amazing at whatever level it is.
Absolutely. absolutely. It's a rare breed, as I tell players, and especially the ones that get their chance to go on to the next level. It goes back to what I say: your work's never done,
Yeah.
and it's not easy. I mean,
Yeah.
it's when they get to college, I always tell them, I said, if this was easy, everybody would do it, and they don't. You're a rare breed on this campus of student athlete, and it's not a knock on the regular students at all. Like, they're there to get their education too, but I think if they went through what a student athlete went through every day, they'd be like, holy smokes, because it's,
Yeah.
General student, you might get up at 7, you might study your rear end off, go to class, study your rear end off, but in the end, you might have more downtime just because of the breakneck schedule of a student athlete. Is just, like I said, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And
Yeah.
they don't. It's especially for you.
No, that's true. Well, let me segue into our last section, because I'm really passionate about this, and I know you are, because of just what you've shared and what you do now. But I think a really important part in softball recruiting is college camps at all different levels. And so I'd love to hear from you, your experience, because I know that's what you do now, and you do a great job doing that. But you've also, there's individual camps and stuff. So I'd love to just hear your heart on how important you feel college camps are in the recruiting process.
Oh, I think they're huge. And that's one of the things at our events. I'm very clear with the prospective student athletes that come to our events. We're an instructional type camp in clinic group with a byproduct of exposure. And the byproduct of the exposure is because we employ collegiate coaches. Like, they come, they instruct, they're required to instruct. Like, our camps, our clinics are not come sit with your clipboard and just take notes. Like, our co-coaches have to instruct. They want to instruct. It's made clear they like working, the quote old school type camps. But what I tell them at the end, I said, hey, this non-institutional camp, which is what our group is, we bring a bunch of college coaches to you. The goal is obviously the education aspect, and then the byproduct of the exposure. If you made a connection to one of these coaches, and I'm doing this because they're usually behind me giving their words too as we're doing the Q&A. I said, if you made a connection with one of these coaches, you need to get on their campus. You need to go to their camps, because there's not a better indication of how they run their programs than going to their camps, because you're going to work with the head coach, the assistant, the student athletes that are there helping, the athletic trainers, maybe the strength and conditioning people, and they're going to run their camps most likely the way they run their practices. So you're going to find out by going to their camp how they are as a coach, how their student athletes are, how they get along. And I don't want to say, you go to a camp, they might be evaluating you, but the student athletes evaluating them too. Because if you go to a camp and they might do some things, you're like, oh, maybe I'm not comfortable with that. Well, that's a good indication you might not fit there. Or, Lord forbid, you get over into a little station and there's 2 or 3 players that are running the station, and you hear some negative things about the other teammates or the staff or whoever, then at that point you might be, oh, that might be a red flag for me. Maybe I don't want to be here. So, but in the total reverse, you might go there and say, holy smokes, this is the perfect spot academically, athletically. These coaches are great. This team's great. And that gives you, like I said, the indication of this is where I belong. So that's big with me of our top group. We want to try to make the connection, but ultimately you got to get on campus. So, the institutional camps and clinics, I think, are key for players. And I get you can't go to all of them. That's why we and again, we're in business. We try to sell ours as, okay, we're going to bring you 15 coaches. Maybe you connect with 1 or 2 of them that like you like them. That's how you're able to dwindle down, okay, which institutional camps am I going to go to at this point? Again, if we can help with that, that's the goal. But I think it's key to get on campus. And like I said, being a former collegiate coach, that allowed me to interact with these players and know what I'm getting. And again, I'm not trying to knock on the current state of club ball or showcase ball or things like that. But, a college coach can go to a showcase, watch a player 3 or 4 times in a row. They might get 2 at bats. They might not ever get a ball hit to them. You don't know at that point. But if they come on campus for 1 or 2 days and you're hitting balls balls at them, you're running them through drills, offense, defense. At the point, then you're actually getting to see what their skill level might be, even if it's like you do a controlled scrimmage at the end, which a lot of institutions will do, that type of deal. You're getting to see them at that point, that competition, but yet educational rep point, as I like to call it, where they're actually getting balls, and you're actually evaluating where their skill set is and maybe where their skill set can go at that point. So yeah, I think institutional camps are key for any player.
Yeah, I think one of the things I love too about like what you put on is if someone's, you can't, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of colleges that have softball programs. And so you can't just make a list and go, okay, number one, number two, and go to every single one.
Right.
So as a student athlete, prospective student athlete, he's going, yeah, I want this area and this. One of the things I love that you do is you bring so many different colleges. So it gives them the ability to go to one camp, yet they may interact with 10 different coaches. So Coach Lee, thanks again so much for being with us. And the last thing I'd love to ask is if somebody's interested in finding out about your camps, about getting in contact with you, just in help with the recruiting process, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
You can, obviously, I'm on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or X, whatever it's called now, from that standpoint. And then our website's Dobbins Softball CD.com. So that'd be like Dobbins Softball Consulting and Development, but my last name, softball CD.com. You can also reach me on my email. That's Dobbins, my last name, scd@gmail.com. I'm glad to help anybody out, and you don't have to be part of our camps and clinics, quote, family. You don't have to attend one of our events. I'm not a recruiting service. We don't charge for things like that, but if parents or coaches or prospective student athletes themselves want advice or needs a little help pointed in the right direction, we're glad to do that. And like I said, if you show up at one of our events, that's even better. We love that too.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, first of all, thanks again for so many years into the softball life and industry and pouring into so many kids. And I'm sure that will continue. Appreciate what you do. And thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Coach, for having us.
All right, take care.